Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the City of Casey Council meeting of the 18th of July 2023. I'd like to start with introductions. My name is Nolene Duff. I'm the chair of the panel of administrators, and I'd like to introduce my colleague panel members, Mr. Miguel Belmar.
Good afternoon.
And Mr. Cameron Boardman.
Good afternoon, Chair.
And this afternoon we're joined by a number of senior officers of the Council, most notably our Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Glenn Patterson, Mr. James Collins, Director City Planning and Infrastructure, Jen Bednar, Director Customer and Business Transformation, Angie Peresso, Director Community Life, Steve Coldham, Director Corporate Services, and assisted by Matthew Crane, AV, and Nicole Road in the Governance Support role. I'd like to open the meeting with the statement of acknowledgement. The City of Casey proudly acknowledges the traditional owners, Casey's Aboriginal communities, and their rich culture, and pays respect to their elders past, present and future. We acknowledge Aboriginal people as Australia's first peoples and as the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we work and live. The diversity statement. City of Casey is home to remarkable diversity with many cultures, languages, faiths and communities of worship, ages, LGBTQI+ identities and landscapes, together forming our rich and dynamic community story. From our first Australians to our most recent arrivals and every wave between, the City of Casey welcomes and represents all community members and their respective ambitions to live healthy, rewarding and happy lives. We recognise this diversity as our strength and we aim to share, nurture and celebrate it. I now move to item 2, the confirmation of minutes, and there's one set of minutes to be confirmed this afternoon. That was the meeting held on the 20th of June 2023. Do I have a mover and a seconder to confirm the minutes of the meeting?
I'll move those.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar.
Seconded, Chair.
Seconded, Mr. Boardman. All in favour? Carried. Declaration of interests. I've considered my obligations under the Local Government Act, Section 130, and I don't have any interest to declare relevant to today's agenda papers. Do any council officers or fellow administrators have any conflicts to declare?
I've got nothing to declare, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman.
Nothing to declare, Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Belmar. Now move to item 4, public question time. And there were 21 public questions submitted through Council's website for this afternoon's Council meeting. A number of the questions are of a similar topic, so we have grouped those together, and I'll work through those and explain that as we go through the questions. The first question is from Mr. Ryan Halkett, and the subject is the Viola track record. How can Council with good conscience consider the erection of a waste transfer facility when it will be managed by Viola, given their horrible track record of managing the HP tip? Our Acting Manager Planning and Building has provided the following response. At this meeting, Council is considering only the adoption of the development plan. The merits of a new transfer facility on land within the Hampton Park Hill development plan area will be subject to a separate planning permit application process. Background documents that were prepared by Viola for a potential transfer facility were only provided on the Casey Conversation page for information and purposes to show what a facility might look like, not what it necessarily would look like. The second question is also from Ryan Halkett, and the subject is Council's relationship with the community. Whilst Council have taken all legally required steps with ratepayers through the HP Hill development plan, the community feedback is obvious. We do not want this facility. Why does it feel like Council is merely entertaining us in the process and not actually listening to and taking action on our feedback? In response, the Acting Manager of Planning and Building has provided the following response. All submissions have been carefully considered by officers before reporting this matter to Council. Future planning proposals that have not been submitted to Council are unable to be considered when making a decision on the adoption of the Hampton Park Hill Development Plan. While we understand these matters are important to residents, they are beyond the scope of the development plan. All submissions received have been considered and responded to, and those items of submission and the responses are outlined in attachments 2 and 3 to the current Council report. Where changes have been made, changes have been made to the Hampton Park Hill Development Plan as a result of matters raised in the submissions. The third question is from Amanda Haslam, and it's also with respect to Hampton Park Hill. Why does Council admin support the Hampton Park Hill plan when A, there was such a significant and overwhelming rejection of the plan by local residents, B, that none of you were elected by any of us, therefore the input by residents should have had much more weight placed on it and was completely ignored, C, none of you live here, and D, you didn't even accurately portray or respond to our original questions as they were posed. And once again, the Acting Manager Planning and Building has provided the following response. We acknowledge that there was considerable public interest in the Hampton Park Hill Development Plan project, with more than 1,000 submissions received via the Casey Conversations webpage as part of the exhibition process. We understand that the matters raised are important to residents, but not all of the concerns raised in submissions could be accommodated through changes to the development plan. Changes have been made to the Hampton Park Hill Development Plan to address relevant matters raised in submissions. The Hampton Park Hill Development Plan summary of submissions, attachment 2 of today's papers, and the Hampton Park Hill Casey Conversations summary submissions, attachment 3 of today's Council papers, summarise the submissions with an officer response. Where a submission provides extensive details, a summary of the key points in the submission has been provided by Council officers. Further question today from Gary Page, the subject being Hampton Park Hill Development Plan and PSA C294 endorsement of development plan and authorisation to exhibit. The question is, Casey Council enabled, refer to contracts signed by past Chief Executive Mr Tyler, construction of a landfill gas pipeline along the transmission line reserve from Ormond Road North, along the transmission line easement to LMS's Narre Warren North Power Station. The Narre Warren North Power Station has vacant capacity for the additional units. The northern boundary at Ormond Road is just metres from this pipeline. Why reserve space for a power station on site when the landfill gas can be pumped to an existing LMS facility in Casey? The Acting Manager Planning and Building has provided the following response. A LMS gas to energy facility is already operating from Hampton Park Hill Development Plan Precinct. LMS have not indicated that they wish to expand the Narre Warren North facility as a result of landfill gas being extracted from Hampton Park Hill. The next is a grouping of questions, which were questions 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11. All of those questions were with respect to the new draft EPA guidelines, and those questions were submitted from Troy Van Gorp, who committed 2 questions on the topic, Patricia Rivers, Raymond Dully, Shannon Lynch, Viv Payne and Kim Murphy. And officers have provided the following response. The development plan has been prepared in consultation with the Environment Protection Authority, EPA, and the Department of Transport and Planning, DTP. The EPA have provided input into drafting and buffer maps contained in the development plan, and both the EPA and DTP have not recommended the project be put on hold due to EPA's new draft guidelines that suggest a 1.5 to 2 kilometre landfill buffer. The landfill operation has a current permit to operate until 2040. Post-closure of the landfill, rehabilitation and gas extraction would continue for a period of time. The EPA recommended buffer for landfills is 500 metres, which currently applies to the existing Hallam Road landfill site. The final outcome of the EPA's new draft guidelines is unknown, and until the guidelines are legislated, the development plan must rely on the current 500 metre buffer and the provisions of the Casey Planning Scheme. The development plan, as recommended in this afternoon's meeting, does not introduce a new landfill buffer into the Casey Planning Scheme. This matter, if relevant, can be considered as part of a separate planning scheme amendment that examines the future use of the buffer area overlay. Next question is question 12, and it's submitted from Patricia Rivers, and the subject is the 2 kilometre zone for Hampton Park Hill Recycle Centre. I'm concerned about the proposed 2 kilometre buffer around the landfill, which the EPA have suggested, with the council allowing houses to be built so close to the landfill. In the 2 kilometre radius, there are thousands of people living in houses, schools and a children's centre, to name a few reasons why the recycle centre should not be approved. In response, officers have provided the following information. The Casey Planning Scheme at clause 53.10 outlines threshold distances for land uses that have the potential for adverse amenity impacts to sensitive uses like dwellings. A transfer station that does not accept organic wastes recommended threshold distance is 200 metres, not 2 kilometres, from sensitive uses. Any planning permit application for such a use would be assessed against these criteria and require an EPA licence. Question 13 is from Raymond Daly and Ruth Daly, and again the topic being the Hampton Park Hill Development Plan offsite residential amenity impacts. In regards to the waste transfer facility, which is what this whole development plan is about, and given that off-site residential amenity impacts are factual and well documented and still ongoing, as noted in the meeting agenda, then why is it only likely and not compulsory that such a proposal as a waste transfer station would be reported to the council for a decision, with consideration being given to any potential off-site amenity impacts? Officers have provided the following response. Any planning permit application submitted for a transfer station would require external referral to the EPA and a range of technical reports to be submitted to council. The proposal would be assessed and consideration would be given to whether it should be reported to a council meeting for decision. While planning permit applications are exempt from public notice, consideration would be given to any potential amenity impacts on nearby residential properties as part of this assessment process. The development plan also encourages the same potential amenity impacts to be considered when new use and development is being proposed within the precinct. Question 14 is from Ruth Daly, Hampton Park Hill Development Plan. In order to ensure transparency and address public concerns, could the council provide detailed information regarding the anticipated commercial financial benefits or gain Casey Council alone expects to gain by designating Hallam Road landfill as a significant site of waste and recovery? Officers have provided the following response. The state government have designated the Hallam Road landfill area as a significant site for waste and recovery. Council's role in this matter as a responsible authority, in capital A's, responsible authority, capital R, capital A, under the Planning and Environment Act, is to review and update land use planning policy that applies to the Casey Planning Scheme to ensure it retains its currency with state government planning policies. Question 15 is from Bernadette Dixon, and the subject is the purpose of the significant site for waste and recovery. The question is regarding page 7, acknowledgement of community concerns about a waste transfer station as a separate matter seems misleading. The Development Plan Overlay Amendment aims to align with waste and resource recovery objectives from SWWRIP and MWRRIP, which include establishing a waste and recovery centre for a circular economy. Can the Council clarify the discrepancy and provide information on the implementation plans for the waste and recovery, considering the amendment's focus on designating a significant site for waste and recovery? In response, officers have provided the following. Changes to the development plan include 3 staging plans that broadly identify future land use areas for waste and resource recovery, employment and public open space. These staging plans are designed to recognise the changing land use opportunities aligning with the closure and rehabilitation of the existing landfill. Specific information on the exact types and discrete future location of waste and recovery uses are unknown, as they are subject to future planning permit applications. The changes to the existing special use zone via proposed planning scheme amendment will provide further detail and opportunity for community consultation around this matter. Question 16 is from Kim Murphy, and the question with respect to Hampton Park Hill is the consultation and communication of the Hampton Park Hill project is referred as being well distributed within the community by council. Can you please advise, considering the deeply diverse demographic that will be affected by this site and the overall outcome, how many languages this was communicated in? Officers have provided the following information. The development plan was placed on public exhibition from the 6th of July to the 14th of August 2022. Notice of the development plan was placed in local newspapers on 4 occasions, and several public consultation sessions were held during the exhibition period. Council officers also attended a public meeting held by the Lynbrook Residents Association. Interested persons could and still can access free translation and interpreting services that are advertised on Council's webpage, along with the other relevant exhibition documents. Question 17 is from Bernadette Dixon, and the subject is criterias for an independent panel. On page 8 of the Casey Council Agenda, 18th of July 2023, there is a statement that should there be submissions that oppose the amendment that cannot be accommodated through changes to the amendment, an independent planning panel will be required to consider the merit of the submissions and Council's proposed planning scheme changes. What are the criteria or considerations that need to be met in order to initiate the formation of an independent panel for further assessment? Officers have provided the following. The Hampton Park Hill Casey Conversation page and frequently asked questions sheet provides details around the planning scheme amendment process and opportunities for the community to make submissions at the planning scheme exhibition stage. Submissions that oppose the amendment and where the amendment cannot be changed to address the concerns raised in the submissions are referred to an independent planning panel for consideration. The panel would then provide a report with recommendations to Council for its consideration. Question 18 is from Candace Schultz with respect to tree and foliage protection policies. Casey Council in their environment strategy aims to increase tree cover from 16% to 21% by the year 2030. This cannot be achieved without halting the loss of tree canopy cover on private land. Greater Dandenong Council has just introduced a municipal-wide local law for tree protection on private land. When is the City of Casey going to do the right thing and enforce these policies? And officers have provided the following. The Greening Casey Draft Plan is a detailed roadmap for the City of Casey to increase tree canopy cover, build climate resistance and create places people love. The draft plan sets out how we aim to increase tree canopy cover across the city, which areas will be targeted for greening and how trees and vegetation in the city will be managed into the future. Within this, there are a number of proposed actions to reduce the loss of tree canopy cover on private land. Community feedback is now open until Wednesday the 26th of July 2023 at 5 p.m, and members of the public can provide feedback through the Casey Conversations webpage. Question 19 is subject matter helping Australian businesses. The question's from Annette Newey, and the question is, are local Australian companies and Australian contractors hired for council projects, and is the material used also sourced from Australian companies? In response, the Local Government Act 2020 requires council's procurement policy to promote open and fair competition and provide value for money. Accordingly, council encourages all companies and contractors to bid for council projects and makes procurement decisions that advance local economic, environmental and social objectives where value for money can be demonstrated. Local Australian companies are engaged for council infrastructure projects, and the materials used in these projects are procured according to the relevant specifications and with regard to value for money principles. Reference can be made to Council's procurement policy, which is on Council's website, for extensive detailed information about how Council makes procurement decisions. Question 20 is from Kelvin Granger and Dean Hurlston, and the subject matter is cost shifting. Can Council please advise the dollar amount of cost shifting from state government they estimate incurred in the 2022-23 financial year? In response, officers have advised, and we are aware, that Council's financial position for the 22-23 year is yet to be finalised, given that it's only just a few weeks ago that the financial year ended, and yet to be audited by the Victorian Auditor General's Office. Later this financial year, Council will review and consider the long-term impacts of cost shifting as we develop our 10-year financial outlook and ensure the financial sustainability of the City of Casey. Nevertheless, cost shifting has been a major financial issue for local government for many years and poses a risk on both the ability to deliver services and local government's financial sustainability. Cost shifting happens when state and federal governments reduce in real terms payments to local government but maintain a requirement for the same level of service delivery, or require councils to perform new functions without adequate resources. Casey has experienced cost shifting over recent years relating to implications by other levels of government enacting legislation or programs which require local government to implement those programs. For example, new immunisation programs, building services reform, kindergarten reform, family daycare, landfill levy increases, and the upcoming waste services that relate to new curbside waste reforms. Some of these legislative impacts are yet to be determined. However, as a quantified example, the state government landfill levy is an estimated $4 million increase over the past 3 years, just for the City of Casey. Council's capacity to respond to cost shifting is quite limited, and all options have potential detrimental consequences for the delivery of services to our community. Councils operate in a rate-capped environment, which makes it very difficult to deliver in these challenging economic conditions where our costs are growing at a greater rate than the rate cap. Question 21 is from Brian Oates, and the topic is Council's changes to aged care and disability services. What are the benefits for Casey's aged and disabled residents from the Council's changes to aged care and disability services? How were those recipients and how were those recipients and how will potential new recipients of the new services be communicated with in regard to the changes and access to the services and benefits? When Casey was delivering its full suite of aged and disability services, data highlighted 8% of the older population and 4% of the disability population across Casey were being supported through council services. By adopting the Living and Ageing Well Action Plan 2023 to 25 in March of this year, Council's focus will be broader than direct service delivery. As Council's demographic modelling indicates, our older population will increase by 60%, or 122,000 people by 2041, accounting for 22% of the Casey's total population by that year. The Living and Ageing Well Action Plan focuses on creating a community where people of all ages, especially older people and people with a disability, have greater access to their community services and supports. This includes improving the infrastructure such as transport, housing and availability of access to health and social services and activities. Council will continue to deliver services where there are gaps in the market to support our most vulnerable community members and redirect investment into creating an age and disability friendly city to support a far greater portion of the community in a way that is sustainable with our growing population. We're also currently working through the Living and Ageing Well Action Plan monitoring and evaluation framework. However, the Living and Ageing Well Community Reference Group, which includes broad representation from people within Casey over the age of 55, will play an important role during the life of the plan. Quarterly updates on progress and achievements in the plan will be shared with the group and their advice sought and fed back to relevant teams responsible for the actions. As part of this ongoing advisory role, members will be an additional channel for community feedback and will help promote successes to their communities. If you'd like to know more about the reference group or would like to participate, please reach out to officers by email to livingandagingwelladvisory@casey.vic.gov.au. That's livingandagingwelladvisory@casey.vic.gov.au. Please also note that Casey remains delivering volunteer and community transport, meals services, allied health brokerage and case management programs, which service approximately 400 people ongoing, and the linking service, which helps approximately 60 people per month to access local services and activities. This is in addition to Council's commitment to supporting older people and people with a disability. So I thank all those people this afternoon who've raised questions, and I will now move on to officer reports. That's item 5 on the agenda. And the first item this afternoon is item 5.1, the Hampton Park Hill Development Plan and PSA C294, endorsement of development plan and authorisation to exhibit PSA. I'd just like, before I prevail on my colleagues to determine whether they're prepared to move and second the recommendation in the report, just wanted to provide a bit of clarity, and I think some of that has been covered in the questions that people have raised, but I just wanted to work through that in a bit of sequence and just so that we're clear on what the Council is actually considering the recommendation in this report this afternoon. So today we're making a decision on a recommendation from officers, and they are recommending to adopt the amended Hampton Park Hill Development Plan. Council's role in the Planning and Environment Act 1987 is to consider and decide on the development plan in accordance with state government policy and the provisions of the Casey Planning Scheme. In this regard, there are several strategic policy documents that are state government policy documents that Council must have regard to. They are Plan Melbourne 2017 to 2050, the statewide Waste and Resource Recovery Infrastructure Plan, and the Hallam Road Waste and Resource Recovery Hub Plan. So they're the 3 key strategic policy documents that the Council must consider when considering the development plan. The state government has identified the land as one of 22 hubs across the state of state importance for waste and resource recovery to service the needs of Victoria. The development plan must be consistent with those state government policies. The plan will facilitate future development of land around the existing Hallam Road landfill for waste and recovery activities, regional public open space and light industrial activities that generate local employment opportunities. As part of this, a substantial tract of land will be vested as an active open space contribution, and we have confidence that that land is suitable for open space. This will see land available for the community for sporting grounds in the north of the precinct, potentially as a first stage of a regional open space delivery. Submissions received during the exhibition period of the development plan were reported to Council in December last year, and concerns raised in the submissions were detailed in that report. We're very aware as a panel that the development plan has attracted considerable community interest, with more than 1,000 submissions received. We're, as a panel, have been involved in 4 very thorough briefings from officers, and we've obviously had the benefit of access to the submissions and the submissions variously made through this forum to the panel, to the council. So council officers have met with the EPA 5 times, Viola Australia on a monthly basis, and the Lynbrook Residents Association representing residents' issues 5 times during the preparation of the development plan. The panel are very mindful of the concerns raised in submissions around the operation of the existing landfill and a mooted proposal for a commercial transfer station on the land, and a future commercial transfer station on the land would be subject to future planning permit processes. We acknowledge the concerns that residents have raised, but due to Council's statutory-based planning role in the process and the requirement that Council decisions not conflict with state government policy, we can't consider a number of those concerns and activate our appropriate administrative duties under the Planning and Environment Act 1987. So as outlined, many of the matters raised are matters for future planning permits, and officers will continue to work closely with the EPA to ensure the potential for off-site amenity impacts such as odour, dust and noise are managed in line with planning approvals and EPA legislation. So I thought it was just important to outline from our perspective and in our words what our role as a panel is in this matter before we actually consider the officer recommendation and report. So I now move to the officer report, and I seek a mover and a recommendation, mover and a seconder for the recommendation on page 4.
Yes, Chair. I will move the 5 items that appear under this heading.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. And a seconder?
Chair, the recommendation is put as seconded by me.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. Mr. Belmar, I invite you to speak to.
Thank you, Chair, and
motion.
thank you for your opening comments, and I hope I don't restate too many of them. Tonight, what I'm considering, or we are considering as a panel, is a planning issue which we must consider within the constraints of the legislation under which we work. And not only consider them under those constraints, but also consider them under planning principles. And for me, one of those is always whether what can be achieved will ultimately be described as an acceptable planning outcome. And that is, I understand, a difficult concept sometimes, because planning is not about perfection. Planning is about what can be achieved within constraints that apply. And in this particular context, the constraints that apply to the decision we're making, as you've identified, Chair, include state government legislation and state government legislation and state government documents. So in that context, that is a context that I'm considering and in which I'm moving this motion. I note that there is a current plan. That plan was adopted in 2015. And the briefings we've had and the work that has been done has been about amending that plan. So it's not as if, it's not a matter in which we're introducing something completely new. What we're doing is considering what is there at the moment, considering changes that there's been to state government direction since 2015, and then taking advice from council officers about how to use the information they've presented to us to come up with a planning outcome. As I understand the plan, as I perceive the plan, it will be a vehicle for change for the area, which will ultimately benefit the broader community through the provision of public open space in the longer term, once the existing landfill comes to an end, and also provides an increase in local job opportunities. The plan will influence the future character of the area through improved urban design outcomes, with a focus on landscaping, high quality building design and pedestrian and cycling connections throughout the area and to the existing residential estates. If I can just stop there for a moment, noting the documents that have been presented to us as the supporting documents in the preparation of the plan. I note that part of the supporting documents that have been considered and to which we've had access include a Hampton Park Employment Land Needs Assessment, an Urban Design Interface and Context Report, a Traffic Engineering Assessment, a Biodiversity Report, an Infrastructure and Servicing Report, a report into Transfer Station Upgrade Overview, and a Hampton Park Transfer Station Noise Impact Assessment. By my calculation, that's at least 6 expert reports that have been obtained and have been considered in putting together the plan. And what that tells me is that this has been careful work that has been undertaken by officers in obtaining expert advice in matters in which they may not be experts, and built that into the decision, or built that into the advice that they are giving us and the advice that we're pursuing this evening. Part of that advice is that a planning scheme amendment will be required to amend the existing planning controls that apply to the land to support the implementation of the development plan. And the amendment will amend the special use zone and the development plan overlay. There's also been discussion about a buffer overlay. And as part of the motions that I'm moving tonight, I am moving that the proposed buffer area overlay will be delayed until further work and investigation has been undertaken and a future report received by council. And it's clear from the motion that that is not on the never never. There's a time limit within which we're seeking that occur, and that gives me satisfaction. That gives me a surety that council officers are considering that as well and will move on that. While any future planning permits that are generally in accordance with an approved development plan are not required to be given public notice, planning scheme amendments and EPA development licence applications do provide an opportunity for community feedback via future public exhibition processes. And each of the steps that I've discussed, firstly, the planning scheme amendment process, that has a number of steps that need to be considered, which include public exhibition. The planning permit application process has a process by which there can be referral to external authorities and consideration of technical reports and another report back to council, so that there is an element of review by this body, either us or a future body, which will consider those matters. And finally, the EPA development licence process also has an opportunity for public consultation. Again, that process requires that EPA review any application, that any application be on public exhibition, that the EPA assess the application, including any public comments, and that ultimately the EPA determine that application. So there is a lot of work still to be done after the adoption of this plan this evening, and I am, as the expression goes, can I be satisfied that we are taking a step based on the material and the evidence that's before us, which is an appropriate step? And my answer to that is yes, we can be. This has been careful work that's been undertaken over many months. It's a decision that's come to by council, by me, in a careful and sober manner after analysing a lot of technical material and also considering the constraints under which we're working. And with those comments, I am happy to move this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Chair, I second the recommendation as put, and I acknowledge that by doing so we are probably not endearing ourselves to any popularity contest within the community, and that is completely and utterly reasonable. Both yourself, Chair, and Mr Belmar has articulated very carefully and also explaining upon the answers to quite legitimate questions that were provided to us, not just through the public question time at this council meeting, but also through the extensive community consultation. The most important aspect of which is the role that we play when coming to this particular recommendation and the very soon adoption of the development plan. And Chair, in your opening remarks you made it very, very clear that we don't have an alternative. We must comply with our statutory obligations, not just under the Planning and Environment Act, but under Plan Melbourne and the statewide waste and resource recovery infrastructure plan, in addition to the Hallam Road Waste Resource Recovery Hub plan. We must comply with those particular statutory obligations. There is no alternative. And some of the sentiments that were raised in the consultation and in feedback that we've had around, well, would this be a different result if this council was not under administration? As a matter of fact, absolutely not. There would be no alternative, irrespective of who would be making the decision tonight, apart from the recommendation that is put, that has been carefully and very detailedly described by both the Chair through her answers to public questions and in her opening remarks, and also through Mr Belmar in his description and articulation of not just the process that we have embarked upon to get to this decision now, but most importantly what happens from this point onwards. It is not just one report in isolation that needs to be considered. The development plan, as detailed as it is, and it is comprehensive, it is extensive, it is something that takes into consideration the historical aspects, not just from 2015, but also going back many, many decades before then. But looking at what has happened provides the illustration and provides the key to what needs to occur in the future. But what I want to do specifically is to start with really what is the zero alternative to the decision that we have tonight. And that is, of course, Plan Melbourne 2017 to 2050. So Plan Melbourne is effectively the metropolitan-wide planning scheme, if I put it in a simplistic term. It is not guidelines, it is not principles, it is not ambitions, it is not something that councils or other planning authorities have flexibilities with, it is directions. And that is how it is articulated in the plan itself. So if we start with page 124 of Plan Melbourne, under direction, and I state again, direction 6.7, which is titled Reduce Waste and Improve Waste Management and Resource Recovery, it gives a preamble that by 2042, the projected waste volumes in metropolitan Melbourne will grow by 63% to 16.5 million tonnes a year. So we're looking at 19 years from now, there is going to be a 63% growth in what will be the waste volumes just in metropolitan Melbourne. When we adopted the draft development plan in December, I made some specific references to the challenges, and not just the national, but the international waste management environment caused predominantly by China not accepting our waste, which had a significant impact, particularly on 35% of the gross hard waste that was previously being exported. But contained within the policy guidelines of Plan Melbourne, which has been a direct response to some of those international challenges that this state, and I say it's not unique to this state, this is a global problem, but contained within policy 6.71, also on page 124, it states that by 2026, so we're only talking 3 years away, that the government has an ambition, it's a legitimate ambition to some respect, that 25% of municipal residual waste collected through the Metropolitan Waste and Resource Recovery Group procurements will be managed through efficient and advanced technologies, i.e. they will be recycled. I think all of us would agree with that sentiment, would agree with that ambition, would agree that that is a very worthwhile achievement. But the reality is the technology doesn't exist today. And in the meantime, one of the key services that Council needs to provide all of you and to provide all residents and ratepayers within the municipality is collection of waste and management of waste. And we have to do that not on an isolated municipal basis, we have to do that through a statewide plan that is clearly articulated in Plan Melbourne, but also taking consideration what our national technology recovery and transfer and obligations and opportunities. On page 13 of the development plan, we reference policy 6.7.3, which states protect waste management and resource recovery facilities from urban encroachment and assess opportunities for new waste facilities. There is quite a bit of detail within policy 6.7.3 in relation to what the state government's obligations and expectations are for the 22 hubs that they've identified throughout the state, of which Hampton Park Hill is one, and how that's going to fit in to the statewide ambitions within the Plan Melbourne document itself. So in 2017, when Plan Melbourne was released, it sent the direction that all of us as municipalities, Casey included, had to abide by. And that was a key change, as Mr Belmar has articulated, from what was adopted by this council in 2015. So whilst the decision that we are making tonight, as I said in my opening comments, does not lend us to any degree of popularity or thanks or acknowledgement, it is the only legal and appropriate decision in the circumstance. We have to comply with our obligations under the legislation, we have to comply with our obligations under Plan Melbourne, and we have to comply with our obligations and directions from the state governments under the statewide waste and resource recovery infrastructure plan, which is currently getting updated, which makes it quite clear that Hampton Park Hill is one of the 22 hubs that needs to remain. However, on page 58, as both the Chair and Mr Belmar have equally described in detail, there are the framework plans of what the future use of this site will become. Noting that whilst Plan Melbourne has specific requirements for the hub and for the purpose of Hampton Park Hill at the moment, they will change. They will change as the landfill becomes expended. They will change as new technologies are adopted. And the two or the three specific framework plans, of course, are the closure within a set period of time, the rehabilitation of the land equally within a set period of time, and making it very clear that the ambition that is clearly articulated in the development plan around the ultimate proposal for the land to be completely transformed, hopefully to meet community expectations. We cannot be more clear than that. But this is only the first part of this journey at this stage of our statutory obligations. So the buffer area overlays will go through a separate process. Any referral or extension to licence to existing operators on the site will go through a separate process. We are a responsible authority under the Planning Environment Act. We have to be cognisant and very specific of our obligations under those legislative principles, and that is what we have to abide by. And whilst there will be anger, completely understandable, and there will be disappointment, and there will be blame, I have to give a very clear message through you, Chair, to all of the residents and all those individuals who are impacted by this, that the process we have undertaken is as extensive, as comprehensive and as diligent a process that I have seen in decades in public life. And whilst it does not necessarily get to the point where the community would like it to get it in the time that the community would hopefully like it to be, I do give one ray of sunshine and confidence that that will happen in the future, but there is a longer process to go through to get there. With those comments, I will support the recommendation as put tonight, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. I'd just like to add a few concluding comments. I also support the recommendation, and for the reasons that both Mr Belmar and Mr Boardman have outlined. But I do in particular note, I think, a very pertinent question that was raised this afternoon by Bernadette Dixon, and that was with respect to the future process and the amendment exhibition, the ministerial adoption amendment exhibition, and what is the criteria for the appointment of a planning panel. And whilst council officers obviously can't assist with the compilation of submissions, they can assist in the understanding of those future processes. So I know that officers are more than willing to outline and provide information and assist your understanding of that process to enable you to participate as residents in those future processes, should the Minister adopt the amendment for exhibition. So please, avail yourselves of that opportunity, and officers, I know, will be most willing to assist your understanding. I'll now put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Now move to item 5.2, which is the extension of the hard rubbish collection, dumped rubbish collection and litter picking services contract number 000431. And we are now on page 135 of the agenda for those who are following the agenda, and there is a recommendation for which I seek a mover and a seconder.
Chair, I will move the recommendation as put.
Thank you, Mr Boardman, and a seconder.
I'll second.
Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Chair, this is a procedural recommendation for the council to exercise its right for a 2-year extension of the contract applicable to our hard rubbish collection, our dumped rubbish collection and litter picking service, with the current contractor being WM Waste Management. We have noted in considering the 2-year extension that Council does receive 85% satisfaction from the community in regards to the users who indicate this service, which has steadily grown from 63,000 collections of hard waste in 2018 to 78,000 collections in 2022-2023. So to receive such a high degree of community satisfaction on what is a vital council service is pleasing, but it also gives strong justification for extending the contract with WM Waste Management. We also note that dump rubbish collection is becoming an increasingly difficult and challenging service for the council to provide. It is not, again, unique to Casey. It is something which has got statewide implications, and it is certainly a costly and very challenging service for council to provide. We acknowledge that WM Waste Management has a number of diversion programs in place that they can continue to look at more efficient processes to not just educate and work with us on providing information to the community, but also looking at processing and recovery opportunities, but to ensure that we can continue to provide a high level of service, which is a hallmark of one of the justifications for extending the contract. So we have read the procurement and legal obligations that were historically relevant in this contract, and the justification and the performance indicators as I've articulated, and for those reasons, Chair, I'm pleased to approve the 2-year extension.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also in favour of extending the contract. I've considered the confidential material with respect to the matters that it raises, and I'm satisfied with that material. I also note that this service has seen pleasingly seen that it's now the majority of bookings for using a part of the service are done online, with an increase of that from 20% at the beginning of the contract to now 80%, showing that the community is obviously on board with this service being online. And secondly, and also pleasingly, I also note that this contract was the first hard waste service in Australia to be provided using a dedicated electric reload compactor truck. So again, great to see that Casey was at the forefront of a sustainable development. And so, noting the great work that's been done by this contractor in a difficult area of work, I am happy to second the motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. We now move on to item 6, consideration of reports of committees, and I simply note the record of discussion as listed in the agenda papers this afternoon. Item 7, petitions. There are no petitions for the council meeting submitted today. Item 8, late reports. There are none. Item 9, urgent business. There is none. And so that leaves me to item 10, to close the council meeting and to thank participants in the gallery this afternoon for attending, and those who submitted questions, and also those who joined us on the live stream. So I bid you good afternoon.